Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Extremely excited to be covering the Miami Heat in today's trade guide, continuing our series of trade guides for all 30 NBA teams leading into the February 2025 NBA trade deadline. If you guys are new to Utility Sports or have been enjoying the content here recently, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more future uploads and content. Remember, I will be live during the entire week of the NBA trade deadline as well, so you're going to want to be there to not miss out on any of the news that we get. And if you are a fan of the Miami Heat, comment hashtag Heat Culture down below. I want to hear your guys' voices. I read every single comment. I'm going to be leaving the little hearts on every Heat Culture comment that we get on today's video. So again, thank you guys all so much. And let's jump into that video preview here now, where we first talk about the salary aprons and how do they impact the Miami Heat. From there, we will pivot to the draft pick situation in Miami, which is pretty complicated actually. And with the Stepien rule specifically, there are a lot of potential downfalls to the Miami Heat and their current iteration of roster and how they could potentially make winning trades. We're then going to talk about some of their tradable players and their contract situations and how that relates specifically to Jimmy Butler and all of the rumors, all of the drama, all of the noise that just never seems to leave Jimmy Butler alone. We'll talk about all of that in today's video as well. And then we'll conclude by talking about Pat Riley and the projected activity level of the Miami Heat for this upcoming February. Apron positioning, I think, is one of the most important things to talk about, and I'm going to start a lot of these trade guides with this specifically because understanding the CBA, understanding the team's positioning within the aprons, within the salary, and for Miami specifically, a team that is $7.5 million over the first apron and a little bit under $3.5 million below the second apron. They don't have a ton of flexibility, but they do have some flexibility, and I think this note that I have right here is really important. If, and this is a big if the Miami Heat were to aggregate salaries, what I mean by that is trade two salaries together in one deal. If they were to aggregate salaries and potential trades, they cannot surpass $188.931 million in total salary. That is that second apron threshold. So if you have a trade where Miami trades two players together at any point in time, they cannot take in more than $3.3 million of salary. That is an essential note that is by rule now part of the NBA CBA that limits trades. I have a real problem with the way that trades work. I have a real problem with the new CBA and how restrictive it is. I'll talk about that in another future video at some point, I'm sure. But the Miami Heat, you have to be very cognizant of where they're at within the aprons when it comes to making trades. It's also important to know where their draft picks lie, how many draft picks they have, what do they owe out the door. They actually owe 2 first-round picks currently, and there's complications with this one as well. Based on the Stepien rule, they owe their 2025 first to Oklahoma City. That pick is lottery protected in 2025, and it has a backup protection into 2026 where it goes completely unprotected. So if that pick does not convey this year to the Oklahoma City Thunder, it becomes entirely unprotected in the 2026 draft, and there's a lot of talent in that 2026 draft, starting at the top with AJ Debonsa and going down through the top 5, top 10. It's a really loaded draft class, so that's an important thing to note. Oklahoma City, if Miami does decide to tank, which I really don't expect them to do, or if they decide to enter a rebuild, which I really don't expect them to do, that pick would be really valuable for Oklahoma City, so keep that in mind. They also owe a 2027 first to Charlotte with a very similar kind of built strategy that they have to that Oklahoma City trade, where it's lottery protected the first year and then unprotected in 2028. Other than that, they do own their future first-round picks. So they owe 2 first-round picks at the door, both of them lottery protected with backups into the following year, the subsequent year completely unprotected. So there's really no way that they're going to get around at least trading these picks. There's no, provision that it turns into a second rounder. They just become unprotected. So Miami's already working kind of at a position where they don't have all of their assets, which we've seen prove complicated when trying to trade for Damian Lillard, for example. The Heat have not had easy pathways to get deals done because of their restrictions on trades due to the Stepien rule specifically. These 2 picks being out the door makes it really complicated for me to see any way Miami really improves their roster drastically at the trade deadline. Then you factor in the Jimmy Butler drama as well, and featuring these 3 teams, the Phoenix Suns, Golden State Warriors, and the Houston Rockets. Well, guess what? Jimmy Butler is not stopping that drama at all. The first game after Shams Charania reports Jimmy Butler's interest in playing for the Phoenix Suns, instead of calming down the noise, instead of just showing up and handling business like you would expect a superstar to do, Jimmy Butler shows up with orange hair and Phoenix Suns colored shoes on. This is who Jimmy Butler is. This is who he has always been. He is a noisemaker and a little bit of a problem causer. Now, he's a really great basketball player, but if you look at how things went down in Minnesota, you look at the end of his tenure in Philadelphia, obviously the Sixers made the wrong decision paying Tobias Harris, but Jimmy Butler took that personally. I understand that as a competitor, you want him to take that personally, but there's just always been this little bit of drama, this little bit of problem that causes or that arises around Jimmy Butler consistently and constantly. And even though the Miami Heat have been really good with Jimmy Butler, multiple conference finals appearances, a finals berth as well, they have been awesome with Jimmy Butler being their best player. So you don't want to take that away from him, but the Heat right now are at a real pivot point in their organization potentially, and I think Jimmy Butler is throwing extra fuel to the fire, or maybe adding a little bit extra heat to the kitchen, no pun intended, around the Miami Heat organization. And I think for the Heat specifically right now, this Jimmy Butler drama is going to be very problematic. We're going to see these three teams all interested, although I don't think Houston will explore this as aggressively as the other two. I think the real players in this potential pursuit for Jimmy Butler are really Phoenix or Golden State. Those are the two teams that I think would have the most profound interest in Jimmy Butler, given his age and given how desperate I think these two teams could potentially be. The Warriors are trying to compete around Steph Curry, and the Suns, well, Matt Ishbia has been throwing every single asset they have into the wind and lighting it on fire himself. So I could see them trading for a 34-year-old and doing it pretty, happily as well. So it's an interesting situation. It's an interesting scenario. And moving into some of those tradable players, it starts with Jimmy Butler, who is technically in the final year of his deal. He does have an extra year, but it's a player option for that final season, and it's about $52 million. So Jimmy Butler very well could be in his last season with Miami Heat, which is why the trade speculation, the trade buzz is really heating up. You also see someone like Terry Rozier, who the Heat traded for last year. They now have a 2-year, $51.5 million deal with him. The final year of that is non-guaranteed. It's like partially non-guaranteed, so that's an important note, an important nugget there. Duncan Robinson has an early termination option on his contract. He will probably opt into his contract. If I had to guess, I don't think he would opt out of that, given how much money he's making. Kevin Love, 2 years, $8 million. Josh Richardson, 1 year, $3 million. And then Alec Burks as well, 1 year, $2.0 million on a minimum. So the Heat have this collection of veteran talent that they could look to trade. Now, I didn't include Bam Adebayo, Tyler Hero. I guess all bets are off. If Miami wanted to, they could include a variety of different players. But I don't think Adebayo or Hero will get traded this deadline. I would be pretty surprised by that, honestly. So I think the, kind of bigger suspects to watch for in a trade, if Miami does make some trades, centers around their veteran talent, and specifically their older veteran talent, starting with Jimmy Butler, moving all the way down the list through Kevin Love, Richardson, and Alec Burks as examples. Then we look at a trade that I do think makes a pretty good deal of sense, and it's a 3-team trade. I've talked about this at length. I talked about this in my Chicago Bulls video as well, as a team to possibly watch for Bradley Beal as the landing spot. And the reasoning behind that, Chicago's head coach, Billy Donovan, is who coached Bradley Beal in college. We know Bradley Beal and Billy Donovan have a very good existing relationship, and Beal, who has a no-trade clause, if he is going to sign off on any trade, he has to be going somewhere he wants to play, and I think Chicago could afford him that opportunity, reuniting him with his college coach, someone he trusts and has already connected with on a personal level, and then giving him an opportunity to score the basketball, put up his numbers, continue to make the back of his basketball card look good moving forward, help his career averages out a little bit. All of that kind of stuff is what Chicago can offer Bradley Beal at this point in time, which is an interesting thing for him to consider if he were to waive his no-trade clause. That is the most important place to start. If Beal doesn't waive his no-trade clause for any team, he can't get traded. So that is essentially going to be the stopper in any potential deal. You have to have Beal going to a place he wants to go to. I think Chicago with Billy Donovan does make some sense as a result. The Bulls also get Alec Burks in this deal, and they get a 2031 first-round swap option via Phoenix, which could prove to be a valuable asset. Life post Kevin Durant could be very terrible for Phoenix. obviously could be a real problem for them long term. And trading for Jimmy Butler is not going to help their future either, but it will help them in the present. They get Jimmy Butler here into the salary slot, which was Bradley Beal. Remember, Phoenix cannot aggregate salaries as a second apron team, which is super important to note. Notice here, I do not have the Miami Heat picking up more than $3 million in salary. In fact, I have them shaving a little bit of salary, and they turn Jimmy Butler into 3 second-round picks. They have to eat Javon Carter's contract, which is one more year at about $6.5 million. But then they also, out of the deal, get Zach LaVine, and that's a complicated fit for sure next to Tyler Hero. But I look at this as kind of kicking the can down the road for the Miami Heat. You trade Jimmy Butler, you get 3 second-round picks. There's some real questions whether or not you can actually net a real first-round pick for him or not. That will be a tough task to do, but potentially they could get it done. He is a very talented player, but given his contract situation, he poses as a potential rental. And again, drama has followed him everywhere. We'll see what happens. But with the new trade rules, the market's going to be pretty restrictive this year. Getting Zach LaVine, he is the best player in this deal for Miami to potentially walk out with. Listen, people rag on him. His contract's not good. I completely agree with all of those things, but he's a good basketball player. He shoots the ball really well. He's a 3-level scorer, and when he's actually healthy playing basketball, he's a really darn good offensive basketball player. He has his defensive deficiencies. He's not a great all-around player. He's not a top 20 player in the world. This is definitely a downgrade for Miami, moving from Jimmy Butler to Zach LaVine, but it maybe recorrects some of your shot diet, with LaVine being a little bit more of a prominent three-point shooter than Jimmy Butler, being a better three-point shooter than Jimmy Butler, and I think this would maybe give further opportunities to Bam Adebayo being a primary ball handler, and I think the spacing from someone like Zach LaVine getting out in transition a little bit more often can maybe help Adebayo offensively a bit, and also still fit around Tyler Hero, although that fit is kind of clunky in my opinion. And for Phoenix, I think it's pretty clear why you do this. You turn Bradley Beal into someone like Jimmy Butler, who's just really good and a real significant two-way upgrade. This significantly helps their championship window, which I think is already closed, but Phoenix internally does not believe that, so them trading for Jimmy Butler does make some sense. For what I could see them actually doing. It does cost them that swap option. I think the Bulls are getting the best asset in this deal. A first-round swap is really, really awesome. The Suns also give up 3 second-round picks, so the Suns completely empty out their collection of draft picks in this deal, but I think it's a collection of picks that, if they're going to push their chips in, doing it for Jimmy Butler, getting off of Beal's no-trade clause, I think is probably one of the best options the Phoenix Suns have to make it this trade deadline. They don't have a ton of optionality, so this might be the best that they can do at the trade deadline. We then look at another Jimmy Butler trade, this one with the Golden State Warriors, sending Jimmy Butler, Kevin Love, and Alec Burks all to Golden State, and Miami shaving off a little bit of money on their own roster, gets this collection of contracts. I talked about this one in my Warriors trade guide as well, as a real landing spot for Jimmy Butler, and I think a really smart move for the Miami Heat if they're able to get something like this done. It breaks up Jimmy Butler's ginormous contract into this collection of mid-sized, smaller contracts that would give Pat Riley a ton of flexibility to make other trades. A year from now, could he retrade Andrew Wiggins? Very likely he could. Could he find a way to retrade Kyle Anderson? Very likely he could. Could he retain Gary Payton II and Kevon Looney? I think he potentially could, although I'm not sure that would be essential for them. And you get a first-round pick out of this deal in 2025. So getting a first-round pick for Jimmy Butler, I think, is the very best you can do, given his current market, what I expect him to go for up in the open market. I think it's either going to be a huge collection of second-round picks or another expensive player and a first-round pick, or just some combination of contracts like this and a first-round pick. This will come down to how desperate Golden State is to compete and contend around Steph Curry. I think the Warriors could also try and sniff around LeBron James's availability, see if they can bring him in potentially. That would be a big question, of course, for Golden State moving forward. But I think the Heat specifically here, if they get off of Jimmy Butler, getting a collection of contracts that gives them further flexibility financially to make future trades. You pick back up a first-round pick in 2025, which could be very valuable for them as another trade asset or just an asset to pick someone in the draft. Miami has typically done pretty well drafting outside of the lottery even, so if the Heat are able to find talent in 2025 outside the lottery with that pick, after making this trade with Golden State, that could be really good for them. And for the Warriors, I think it's pretty obvious. You bring in 3 veteran talent players who can fit your roster, fit your team. Love can stretch the floor for them, outlet and transition. Jimmy Butler does a good job on both ends of the floor, and I think would give them that in-between game that they haven't had for a while, post Kevin Durant. And then Alec Burks specifically, is going to provide what the Warriors want him to provide in terms of the expectations. They know him, they're familiar with him, and I think a reunion there could make some sense as well moving forward. So when it comes to projected activity level, obviously the Heat are such a big question mark. There's been so many years where I think they're going to make a big trade. I remember 6-7 years ago, all of the noise, all of the speculation, all of the rumors about Miami looking into Danilo Gallinari as an example, and then nothing just ever materialized. Pat Riley is one of the hardest people in all of basketball to predict. He has mechanisms. The Heat salary cap guys have so many creative ways to move things around and figure out things out the way that they want to, and it has really elongated their championship window and their competition window. I think they're on the back end of that now, though. So will Pat Riley be active? Will he ultimately trade Jimmy Butler? I think when there's smoke, there's fire. There's a real chance that Jimmy Butler does get traded. He might be the core headlining player to get moved this trade deadline, and I think everything could start and stop with the Miami Heat if it comes down to Jimmy Butler. Teams are going to be patient. Teams are going to want him, specifically Phoenix and Golden State, two older teams that I think are really trying to compete right now, trying to win right now. And I think really it all comes down to whether or not Pat Riley's willing to do business and if he's willing to take pennies on the dollar for a player as talented as Jimmy Butler. If I was running Miami, I would really look into it. I think the flexibility you would acquire by trading Jimmy Butler, getting longer contracts to later trade at a later date would be better for Miami long term than just flat out risking losing Jimmy Butler for nothing. Although I do understand some of the hesitancy to attach your name to a trade. You don't want to be the guy that traded away Jimmy Butler for X, Y, and Z if it's not a good trade to make. So keep that in mind as well. But I do think the Heat are going to be active. I think they're going to be taking phone calls. I think they're going to be one of the more essential teams in the NBA trade deadline because of the caliber of player that they might trade away in Jimmy Butler this February. I really hope you guys did enjoy. Don't forget to comment Heat culture down below. I am going to be leaving those little hearts on every single one of those comments. Thank you all so much for taking your time to watch this video. I really appreciate each and every one of you, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.